Here on the bench, I've got a 1979 Fender Bassman 70. The owner said that one of the channels was not working originally when he first had a problem with it. Took it to a local tech, and it apparently was something simple and got the channel that was not working. But it is a little hissy and noisy, and the client wanted the tech to go through the amp and do all the normal maintenance stuff, check to see everything's good, everything up to code, point out any potential issues or areas of concern. And the owner was not satisfied or convinced that the tech actually did that. So it is powering on and sounds pretty good, but we're gonna go through it and see if we see anything that the previous tech missed, and we're looking for a clean bill of health. So let's see what we find out. So upon my initial inspection on the inside of the chassis, everything for the most part seems stock and unmolested, except for one little area that is kind of disappointing, that the tech either neglected or just didn't catch. But there's a couple little things right in this area. If you can, I'm gonna try to zoom in the camera. Right here, this big old resistor right here. Take a look at that solder joint. Let me see if I can move. Right there. There we go. Yeah. That's how I found it. That is not good. Not even making, really, there's got to be an intermittent, if any, contact or connection at all. And then a common thing with these heavy transformers on this thing, it's got a big old honking transformer, is that because of the weight and because of the fact that I believe the owner had this thing bouncing around in the back of his car when he was gigging, the weight of the transformer can actually bend or distort the chassis and can compromise solder joints. As you can see right here, look at that solder, this solder joint right here looks like, yep, it's loose. The other thing I don't like is the ground wire is supposed to be the longest wire out of the three. Reason being, if by some chance while it was plugged in, the power cable got yanked hard enough to get it to come through the strain relief here, that in theory, with the ground wire being the longest one, it should be the last one to be pulled off, which still gives the high voltage a path to ground. And it's also bolted on right here rather than soldered. Let's check to see if that's even tight. So it is tight, but not as tight as it should be. So what I'm gonna do is redo this. By the way, I've already verified that there's no voltage on the filter caps before I go poking around in here with a screwdriver. And this auxiliary courtesy outlet, whatever you want to call it, which are pretty useless, especially nowadays. What I like to just do is, first of all, we still have this ground switch here, which is pretty useless with a 3-prong cord. So what I'm going to do is wire it up the correct way. I'm going to take the power cable loose, strip some more of the main outer insulation off, and get it to where the ground wire is the longest of the three. And I'm going to redo that that ground and solder it on. I'm looking at it here, as you can see, a better example of what I'm talking about. I don't know if you can make it out from here, but you can really see where the chassis is bent. It's hard to see from this angle on the camera, but I can see it very clearly. Right in here, where the bottom of the chassis should be flat, it looks like it was, how would I say? It's pushed up, so it looks like the weight of the transformer kind of caved in the chassis a little bit, probably from being dropped, or maybe because this is a head, maybe the head was riding around the back of the car upside down and hit a pothole or something, or a big bump, a speed bump, and just that enough of a slight drop with the weight of the transformer on the other side would easily be enough to bend this chassis. For now, I don't want to go through the hassle of undoing it all and trying to pound it out, because this is a wax board model where you have the boards have this, you can see it here, this wax cover. You can see it on this unused eyelet here even. We may decide to just redo the thing. For now, I'm just going to take care of this problem and redo the power cable. I'm going to use the terminal on the auxiliary power outlet just for a place to tie in the neutral. And I'm going to bring the hot wire directly to the outer lug of the fuse, so the power goes directly to the fuse, and it's on the inside. There's some controversy about whether to put the hot coming in on the, or if it matters, on the inside connector or the outside. Well, the outside is farthest away from where you might touch with your finger if you had to go in and change a fuse. But given that this is 120 volts, most people, like myself included, who have ever messed around with electronics or even just everyday household appliances, knows pretty well what a 120 volt zap will do to you. It doesn't feel good, but it usually won't kill you. I don't recommend taking any chances, however. There's a disclaimer. However, it does serve as a very powerful instruction tool and learning opportunity. So if anyone was foolish enough to stick their hand in here and mess with it without having first disconnected the power cable, maybe with caution, I should say, maybe they deserve to get a little zap just so they learn to not do that again. And if it prevents them from poking around in the amplifier where there is even higher DC voltage that they should have no business doing if they don't know what they're doing, maybe that little 120 volt zap would actually save their life. But that's neither here nor there. I'm, again, not recommending it. And again, as a disclaimer, do not poke your hands in this kind of equipment if you do not know what you're doing. I highly recommend that you read or review some basic fundamental electrical safety information before even attempting to pull the chassis out of your amplifier. But suffice to say, yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer. Unplug it and discharge the filter capacitors before you start poking around in it. And if you don't know what any of that means, take it to a tech or somebody that knows what they're doing. Anyway, I'm gonna go wire up the power cable correctly and take care of these. I'm gonna solder the ground onto the chassis and do it right, so we don't have to rely on a screw that can very easily get stripped or come loose from vibration. As I said, it was tight, but not as tight as it could or should be. So that's not good. So we're gonna fix that. And I'm gonna redo this solder connection here. I'm gonna suck out all of this old solder and reflow it. That'll be good. And it looks like this. I guess this is not super critical. This is the terminal strip. Well, actually it is, because it's the terminal where this resistor, where these two resistors make contact at this terminal, and those should be grounded properly. And that solder joint to the chassis for the ground is very, noticeably compromised. The terminal strip is it's screwed on and soldered as well, but if I take this screw loose, which was not super tight, yeah, you can see the only thing grounding that thing is this screw bolting that lug of the terminal strip onto the chassis. So as soon as I take that screw out, yeah, that solder joint right there is garbage. So this is stuff that the previous tech should have easily and quickly noticed and pointed out. And stuff like this, there should be no argument as to whether or not it should be taken care of. If it was me, it is me now. I'm not even gonna ask. I'm saying, hey, this just needs to be done. So next, I'm gonna take a look at the filter caps and see what's going on there. All right, I'm gonna do this with you guys. See what we got in the doghouse. Hopefully there are no squatters in here. It's a little joke. And a nice family of Mallory's. These appear to be original. So, yep. We've got the original droppers. They don't appear to be leaking, but given that this is a 79, they are very much due for replacing. So I'm gonna order some new caps for these and probably go ahead and replace these droppers with some higher wattage rated Vichy metal films, which would be much more reliable, as these old carbon comps can and do tend to drift in value, and they are not spring chicken components by any means. So yeah, but other than that, nothing of a horror show. One thing I don't like is that there's no silicone on these, which I guess maybe that might not have been Fender's practice during this era of amps, but you can see that they're loose. There's nothing under them, and we like to put a nice dab of silicone to keep them from rattling around like this. And we can do a much nicer and cleaner job of putting these in. So for now, I'm gonna put this back on until we get those new filter caps ordered, and we will revisit the doghouse when we get those. All right, powering it on, tubes lighting up and warming up. Got the first stage of the repair, fixing up the mess that was over here. I'm gonna get to the other stuff with the power cable a little later. I'll just give it a few more moments to warm up. That'll be good. Got a very faint clicking when I first powered it on, but could be due to those old caps. With the bass at like 2.5 almost. Sounds pretty good. A couple other maintenance things to take care of, but still kicking. Here's a peek at the doghouse after I successfully recapped the entire filter capacitor supply board. Pulled these big ol' honkin' Mallory's. I believe these were the originals, so if so, on a 79, they are overdue for being replaced. And I've already fired it up, and it's definitely made a significant improvement in how quiet it is. So I pulled all these guys out. Got some, let's see, the original value is 220 at 275. And these are run in series on the first side. So I wanted to go with F&Ts as I normally do wherever possible. And I was able to find some 220s in 300 volts. So that's even better. It gives a little bit more. I believe that gives 600 volts rating for these, so that's good. Then a triplet of 22 at 500 volts here. The originals were 20 at 500, so basically the same. And then a couple hundreds at 100 here, and the originals were 70 at 100. So 70 is kind of outdated value for the most part, but these hundreds should be fine. And then for the dropping resistors, got a 1K here, and that appeared to be a 1 watt carbon comp, and then the 4.7, I believe it is, right here was a 1 watt. And so upgraded these with some nice Vichy 3 watts metal films here. And this little guy here, this 2.2K, looked fine. Not a big current draw on this guy, so still read well within specs, so I just left that guy. But like I said, I already fired it up and much more quiet. It's good. These F&T caps should be good for a long time. So I'm happy about that and excited to finally get this thing where I feel more comfortable about playing it. So just gonna button up the old doghouse and I'll be back in a second. Back top side, I did a few more things here that I didn't get around to doing them previously that I'll go over. First thing I did is after I had redone this chassis ground right here that was broken, I just decided it would probably be a good idea to replace those 100K carbon comps with some more reliable Vichy 3 watts right here and right here. And this amp will probably be a work in progress over time. But just as I was going through it, just decided to make some upgrades or swap out some things here and there. And one of the things I did, I really dislike, for many reasons, this plastic insulated wire. Main reason, practically speaking, is that it can melt if you get your solder iron too close to it or accidentally touch it or anything, and it's just ugly. And yeah, I like the look and the feel and the performance of this nice 20 gauge vintage style cloth insulated. It doesn't melt if you accidentally touch it with an iron, so that's nice, and it looks cooler. Not really that big of a deal, but you know, it's a nice touch. So I ran some new wires from that to here to the bias board and where it connects here. One thing I'm gonna do, and that I did, is for whatever reason, even though I don't know if this was original, but the 3-prong power cord, I believe it was, but for whatever reason they still had the stupid death cap in it. So they didn't, in this era, they didn't have that big old Ajax or blue molded cap here on the ground switch. They had this guy right here mounted to this tag strip, and the hole of which they have it soldered to the chassis, which is good, but the front side of it, the hole for the bias board goes through it. So I don't really like extra stuff in the amp that doesn't need to be there. Not really gonna hurt it, but I'm just gonna, as I'm talking, my 80 watt chassis soldering iron is heating up. So a lot of times people like to see that because a lot of guys have questions about chassis soldering. So let me see if this thing is hot enough. Yep, see that? It should, your chassis iron should heat up or melt the solder in the chassis, just like that. Boom. I'm not gonna worry about pulling the solder up off the board. I could, but if at any point in the future we want to solder something to the chassis, we can do it there. So I'm gonna, now that I got that out, I'm gonna, and that's really what you want. You want an iron that's hot enough to where it melts the solder on the chassis almost instantly. because, as you well know, if you've ever tried to do that, the chassis acts as a heat sink, so you need a really hot iron so that you don't have to just cook the hell out of the chassis with a underpowered, underrated soldering iron. That's a nightmare to try to do that. So for those wondering, I use this 80-watt Weller. That's kind of handy because it's got LEDs on the front, gives you a little light. Takes about 10-15 minutes to heat up, but I got it on Amazon and it works great. I was able to redo that as you see in the previous clip. And because I was doing the filter caps on it, I actually redid all of the wires coming off of the supply board. So there's, move the camera over here. We've got these 3 wires here. The green, the black, and the white. The white comes off of the board and goes to this node here. And then this green one is soldered onto the brass grounding strip here where the pots are mounted. And then this one comes all the way over here, and another handy dandy use for that chassis iron is I just replaced that. I just put some better wire. You can see in these all the spaghetti, which is why I said it's probably going to be a work in progress. It's probably not worth it, and maybe won't make that all big of a difference because the amp is fairly quiet for what it is. It's a lot quieter now after I've worked on it, but I just don't like the look of all this spaghetti. I might get rid of these stupid plastic wires for the heaters and redo those. But anyway, like I said, work in progress. These 2 wires, these green and white, also came off the supply board and they tie in here. And then while I was at it, you can see here where I completely disconnected the ground switch. I might repurpose that with a selectable negative feedback or something like that. But anyway, I took the old carbon comp resistors off here and put in some, I believe it's a 2-watt metal oxide here and here, and raised it up. You know, Fender put them right, I mean, there was almost no lead sticking out. It was just right directly connected to these 2 terminals. And then a little screen grid resistor guy in here. I wanted to put a 2-watt, but I was out of those in 1.5Ks. But these 1-watt Vichy metal films would just be fine. I mean, I actually tested the original carbon comps that came out of it, and they still tested fine, but you know, they are known to drift over time, and they're not as heat resistant, so these will be much more stable and reliable. These 2 little 1.5K guys right there. And yeah, that's the majority of what I did. So stand by for a there's still more things that I'm going to do to it, more likely, but for now I feel good about playing it, at least where it is, where I didn't before. It was just had a lot of hum, and you could tell the filter caps were done, and they should be done after 15-20 years anyway. So given that this is a 79, that's well overdue for filter caps, and it clearly made a difference, so well worth that. One other little mod I just decided to do was, because of the fact that these UL Bassman 70s and other Silverface, later CBS models are known to have excessive feedback in the circuit. So what I did is, since I took out the death cap, I repurposed the ground switch to a switchable negative feedback So the green wire coming off of the output transformer, tied it in over here along with the wire that comes off of the auxiliary jack over here to the lug of the ground switch, formerly ground switch, and then the center comes over here to where the negative feedback comes into the circuit. So that's normal. With the negative feedback circuit in. If I switch it to the middle position, it turns it off. So it really sounds like it opens the amp up.